Hey, welcome to episode 119 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman, and I am so excited and honored to introduce you to my next guest. Back in a sec.
Today's guest, Dennis Pitocco.
So, there's so much tension. I guess I'm speaking for myself, but I think for many of us between doing what we love and making a difference in the world and trying to make ends meet and survive and to navigate that tension really takes a lot. And I'm excited to have Dennis on for many reasons, including that he and his wife have really navigated that tension and created an awesome organization that does a lot of good. Let me tell you about Dennis. Dennis, in collaboration with his chief inspirational officer and wife, Allie, has created 360 Nation. Everything they do is for good versus for profit. Their mission over the past decade plus has been to rediscover humanity at its best. To rediscover humanity at its best, influencing and showcasing it every step of the way. 360 Nation encompasses a wide range of multimedia enterprises, including Biz Catalyst 360, an award-winning global media digest. 360 Nation Studios, a producer of uplifting blockbuster events worldwide, and Good Works 360, a pro bono foundation that provides mission critical advisory services to nonprofits around the globe. Dennis is a contributing author to a number of best-selling books, including Check Out This Style, Chaos to Clarity, Sacred Stories of Transformational Change. Please help me welcome Dennis.
Hi. Well, thank you for such a thoughtful introduction, Jason. We've been talking about doing this for probably, 2 or 3 months?
Yeah.
Kind of bounced over the holidays, and you are my first discussion of this nature for 2023. I can't think of a better way to start the year. So thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome, and thanks for being here. I'm very excited that Awkwardly Awesome Podcast is your first discussion because your ideas, from the little I know about you, are profound. So they deserve to be discussed and deserve airtime. So I'm glad. But before we get into 360 Nation, is it okay if we take a trip back in time?
Of course, yes, that'd be great.
So if I had known little Dennis, when you were 7 or 8 years old, and asked you, "Hey Dennis, what do you want to be when you grow up?" What would you have said?
It's funny. That's a question I'm rarely asked. But what I wanted to do, Jason, is I wanted to get into the media business. But when I said media back then, it would be some form of radio or TV broadcasting. And that was my dream as a young child, one of 8, growing up in Pittsburgh. Yeah, it was quite an aspiration. I'm sorry to say I never got there. But
So did you want to do work for a local station or do the national news?
it didn't matter to me. I just wanted to break into the business. I was just interested, and I hate to say it this way, but being behind the microphone and being in the public arena. And back then, it probably would have been more focused on radio, which was much easier to get in back then than
Mhm.
TV. But like many, I would have followed whatever path I could have followed to get there.
How did that dream change as you entered high school?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to my upbringing. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I was one of 8 children. A happy household. Classic case, and my father worked 3 jobs. We rarely saw.
Oh.
We had a happy family. There was no possibility of college. Just the economics weren't there. So we didn't have a lot of choices growing up in Pittsburgh. The natural progression, if you will, in our situation would have been probably into the steel mills back then, which were very active back then in Pittsburgh. And I just didn't want to go there. And so all of my brothers, including me, one at a time joined the armed forces. 4 of us joined the Air Force over time. One of my brothers, the more radical one, joined the Marines. And that began, just interesting enough, I did it because I couldn't get an education. I wanted to see more of the world, and I figured if I joined the service, I would have an opportunity to travel a little bit, and the military would pay for my college. Now, this is kind of interesting because I never did end up going to college all these years later because I went on a different path. But that was the beginning of just my adventure, and it got me out of Pittsburgh, and that was my objective back then.
Before we go any further, I'm an only child, so I don't think of asking this question because I because of my family structure. But where are you in the HO?
Good. I was right in the middle. So I had kind of right in the middle. I had 2 older brothers and an older sister, and then 4 beneath me. So I was kind of middle of the road.
In high school, you developed another dream of getting out of Pittsburgh, and then you found a way to do that through the military.
I did.
Well, when you look back on your time in the military, what did you learn from that experience that has helped you going forward in your life?
Another brilliant question, Jason. It forced me to grow up, and that's hard to define what I mean by that. But I can tell you, I left Pittsburgh. I was literally age 17. I was a
That's so young.
relatively young high school graduate, but it was based on when my birthday came, so I was able to start school earlier. I finished at 17. I left 1 week later for the Air Force, and then I came back 6 months later for a visit. And you never realize until you do that when I came back, it was only 6 months, Jason. But it's like all my friends and everybody, they were doing the same things the same way. And we almost kind of disconnected a little bit because I didn't realize just in that short period of time how much I had matured. Part of it was the pressure of Air Force basic training and being away from home and a little homesickness. But you're kind of forced to grow up very quickly. And I wasn't leaving the country. I was doing all my training in Texas. Eventually, I moved somewhere else, but my core training was there. And it dawned on me when I came home. It's almost like I was speaking a different language to the same people. But the maturity kicked in, which was very important because I'm sure if I stayed in Pittsburgh, my maturity level and my wisdom and everything else you get from leaving home and going out there and kind of gaining a little independence, it wouldn't have happened as quickly.
So many people come to crossroads in life. Like you could have spent your life in Pittsburgh working at the steel mills until that faded away, and than doing something else. What would you say to someone who's at a crossroads in their life and feeling some fear about that decision?
Wow. Well, let me tell you what I did, and I don't want to come across as though I was brilliant. I just adapted a couple things. I watched my father, and I watched him work 3 jobs, and I watched, and he was a good provider. But it's like it kicked in saying, I don't want that to be me. I love him. I've learned a lot from him over the years, but I just don't want that to be me. And so then I had to start thinking about, taking the risk. And this may sound crazy, but, I'm 17 years old. What do I know about, leaving Pittsburgh? And it's scary, and I've never been away from home. And then, I came upon a quote many years ago that I've just embraced. And I forget who said this, but they were much smarter than me, Jason. And it went like this: faith is taking the first step when you don't see the whole staircase. And I can tell you, I never saw the whole staircase. Since then, again, a little wisdom of experience, if I look back, I had to distinguish myself, at least I felt like I had to, by always being the guy that jumped off the cliff when there was an opportunity, when there was a risk. Like I jumped out of Pittsburgh. I didn't know what I was going to face. And I'm going to have to jump forward a little bit. From the Air Force, I ended up going, when I got out of the Air Force, I hadn't gotten my education yet, but they had a job placement program. And they happened to place me in a job in banking. And this happened to be in Philadelphia, not far from Pittsburgh. Now, I had no banking background. What I had was 4 years of disciplined military service, which gave me the opportunity to get a job at probably the lowest level in the bank. But what's interesting about that, because I didn't have the education and the experience and the age and all that stuff was kind of against me, I realized very early on that I had to work harder. I had to take more risks. I had to do more things, at least I thought I did, than everybody else around me, because most of these guys and gals came in with a diploma. And fortunately, it was at a time where you could still work your way to the top versus you can't even get in a door for an interview today, maybe, if you don't have the right credentials. So I worked harder, I worked longer. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I always took the risk or the opportunity. When somebody said, look, we need somebody to go work at a bank branch 50 miles from here, my hand went up. Now, it didn't matter that I had to drive 50 miles every morning back and forth. But I figured if I do that, I'm going to get more experience. I'm going to be hopefully perceived a little more aggressively versus the people that don't take risks. Now, I followed that same kind of risk taking my entire life. And it was scary, but it worked.
Mike, how you might know Mike. How do you know Mike?
Mike is my older brother. He's one of the smart ones that joined the Air Force.
He says, hello, Dennis.
Yes.
How would you compare your spiritual upbringing to your faith today? Mike is diving right in.
He sure is. I wish he would ask multiple choice questions, but I have to say, without reservation, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mike and I have had this chat, my faith is so much stronger than it was when I was a kid. I mean, we were all raised as Catholics. We went to church every week. I cannot tell you that I understood it. I didn't understand faith. I didn't understand the Latin that was being spoken. And it's not a critique of the Catholic Church. I just didn't know what I didn't know. So I call myself a recovering Catholic. I was a Catholic.
Recovering Catholic.
I'm a Christian. I believe I have faith. So I've kind of progressed. In answer to my question, my upbringing was there, but I think it was more robotic, for lack of a better term. I wasn't learning about faith. I was going through the motions. Now I do it on purpose. And Mike, you only get one hard question, so the rest of them better be softballs.
So if my calculations are right, you're 21 when you did your first job in banking.
Yep.
21.
And
And then what did you learn about life and about humans from working in the banking industry?
yeah, it's interesting. Ultimately, I spent 30 years in banking. And because it was at a time where I could be recognized for hard work and risk taking, I did make it up the ranks. So I started at the lowest level and ended up at the top tier of the bank as one of the executives. Now, that took a long time to get there. And I moved across banks. What I learned, first and foremost, is that I never wanted to be a banker. People say, well, you're really good at that. Well, it was the job. I needed the job. I needed the income. I had a family. So I worked hard and I did well, but I can't say I ever enjoyed it. It was an occupation and it was, bringing home the bacon, as they say. So I learned what I didn't want to do, but I also learned sometimes you got to spend, in my case, 30 years doing what you don't want to do so you can then afford and have the luxury of making choices as far as what you do want to do. And as I've said to you in the past, that's when I moved from my occupation to my occupation.
How would you talk about how did your how did working your occupation feel different to you than working in your occupation?
Well, I was going through the motions. I was doing what I had to do. I was working the long hours, but it's one of those things that they say when the alarm clock goes off in the morning, are you excited about getting up? Do you really want to? Do you really want to? Drive 50 miles to your banking location, and what's it doing to you personally? Are you making too many trade-offs with the family because of the long hours? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, again, I don't know how else to say it except I was going through kind of a robotic career. Fortunately, I was good at it because I worked long hours. Fortunately, that was recognized. But I was determined early in years, and again, don't ask me where this came from, Jason, but early in my career, I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to retire by the time I'm age 50. And I missed it by 2 weeks.
You missed it by 2 weeks.
And
Congratulations.
I can't account for those 2 weeks. I don't know what happened to them.
Mike's kind of picking on you here. Here's my softball question. What type of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Well, the quick answer is I want to be the guy, I know we're going to talk about 360 Nation and all the work we do for good. And, we do a lot of, I hate to call it preaching, but we talk a lot about doing good and things you can do to make a difference in kindness and compassion and humanity. I want to be the guy that actually walked that talk. It didn't just sound good. It didn't read well in an article, but people recognized that number one, and I say we, I include my wife, but we were actually walking that talk, whether it be the work we do with nonprofits every day, or whether it be just the power of the messages we communicate on a regular basis through our publishing area. Great question. So that's the legacy we want.
Since you mentioned that, I'm curious, what work do you do with nonprofits on a daily basis?
Well, I'm going to have to give you a little background on 360 Nation, which will connect the dots, because when I said I wanted to retire early, ultimately I progressed into banking, and then I ultimately got out of banking and started my own business, somewhat related to banking. That's how I got to Tampa. Ended up running that business. I had one here, I had one in Canada, I had one in England. Ended up selling all three of them. In England is where I met my wife. And that's when we came back to Tampa, settled down, and theoretically, I could have retired. But we said, look, we're too young for this. We're not ready to do crossword puzzles and all those kind of things. We need to step back and say, how are we going to spend our time? So we, as I've said in many other discussions, we started taking morning walks. We knew that we were blessed with success. But what's interesting about that? It's like the dog chasing the car. You finally catch the car. Now, what are you going to do with it? We caught the car, Jason. And so rather than just jump at something, we decided we're going to start taking walks. We're blessed with the success, but how are we going to define ourselves now? And after a long time, I say months of doing those walks, we finally came up with what was important to us. Number one, we wanted to travel. Now, we both had traveled over the years, Jason, like many business people. I can tell you I've been around the world in business. I've been to Seoul, Korea, but I can't tell you anything about it because I was in a meeting room, an airport, in a boardroom, and, gone. So we both, my wife, Allie, she had done a fair amount of traveling in her independent career. So we said, we're going to do it again, kind of like for the first time, but we're going to do what we call intentional travel, which means we're going to do a map of the world. What do we want to see? Well, we decided we wanted to get out of the USA first because we can always, as many people, as you probably know, never leave this country. It's big enough that you don't have to. We're going to go boldly around the world, and we're going to save America for when we're too old and crotchety to get on airplanes. Then we'll get in a car or in America. Now, somewhere along the way, the pandemic impacted that plan. But let's just say we decided a third of our time is going to be spent minimum traveling the world. And we started doing that, and we've been everywhere. And the second thing,
a third of your time is going to be spent traveling the world. Wow.
Right. Intentionally, like mapping it out. And so we started that. Then we said, the next part of our time is we both, before we met, we had an interest in nonprofits. We had an interest in giving back. We had an interest particularly in helping senior citizens. We just had an affinity for them. So we then started out saying, all right, we're going to divide our time. Another third of it will be giving back to nonprofits. Now, when I say giving back, I don't mean writing checks. Of course, you'd want to write a check. But I'm talking about our time, our talent, and our treasure in that order. And when we say nonprofits, I don't mean sitting in a boardroom, although I've sat on many boards of nonprofits since then. I've chaired boards. We want to stay right at the heart of where the need is. One of the nonprofits we got close to very quickly, and we're still doing it, is Meals on Wheels of Tampa, which happens to be one of the largest independent Meals on Wheels in America. We serve over 1,000 meals a week, and my wife and I have been delivering meals for those senior citizens for about 13 years now. The same people every week.
Well, and you really get to know the people.
Yes, so we're still writing checks. We're donating our time, but we want to touch the people that are impacted by that. So we started with Meals on Wheels. We got involved in the International Red Cross. We got involved in some other. We got involved in a lot. And I can come back to that because that leads to another whole operation that we launched a few years back. The third thing we decided we wanted to do was keep our minds active. I kind of kidded earlier and I talked about playing crossword puzzles. Well, you can read the stories of retirees that they don't stay active. I don't mean just physically. I mean, how do you challenge your brain? So I said one day, we were sitting actually in England. My wife and I were sitting at her sister's dining room table in Southampton, England. This goes back about a dozen years or so. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a website. And my wife said, well, what do you know about building websites? I said, absolutely nothing. What I know is what I would like to see if I visit a website, because I've used them over the years to research. And I was tired of pop-ups in my face and sales pitches and blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm going to teach myself how to do that from scratch.
Wow.
And base it on what people I know would like to see, not just me. And that's what I started. So I kind of self-taught. And of course, she joined me along the way. And that's the beginnings of our media enterprise, which is made up of our publishing, the studios that you mentioned earlier. So as time went on, Jason, we're doing the nonprofit, which is on the ground stuff every week. And now we're doing it even more, and I'll come back to that in a minute. We're doing the traveling, and I can do the website stuff from anywhere, as you know. So it didn't stop us from traveling. And then I did the website, the nonprofit, and the traveling. Now, the nonprofit thing we were a little perplexed by that. As time went on and we started volunteering everywhere and doing what we were doing, it dawned on me that Tampa Bay is a very lucky community. What I mean by that, it's a very proactive nonprofit community. The businesses are very willing to write checks. So Meals on Wheels, for example, is just one of many charities here, that it wasn't hard to raise a bunch of money if you need it to support your cause. But then we started thinking, what about the people sitting there in Boise, Idaho, small town? They might have the greatest nonprofit in the world, but nobody knows they're there, and they don't necessarily have the big businesses. Or what about the nonprofits sitting in Mumbai, India? Better example of, great idea. They got everything. They've got the passion, they've got the mission, they've got the commitment. What they don't have is the money to keep it going, and money comes through visibility. So I had this brainy idea. I said to my wife, this would go back about almost 5 years ago. I said, here's an idea. Let's take everything that we've learned about nonprofits from being in the trenches. Let's take our business experience in running businesses, because a nonprofit is effectively a small business. It's just run by people that maybe don't have the same level of training and talent, because they need all the same things. They need a website, they need sales and marketing, they need fundraising, they need everything. Let's take all that and our own experience. Let's take everything we've learned from building our website, and let's create a new website. And we launched what we call goodworks360.com, which is an entirely independent website from the one we talked about today. And it's based on the same theory, and that is we can now go to any nonprofit, literally anywhere in the world, and say, Jason, I know you're running a nonprofit in Boise, or Jason, I know you're running a nonprofit in Mumbai, India, but if you need help, and if you are a good nonprofit, now the word good means the money goes where it belongs, and we have ways to figure that out through a little bit of diligence, but if those things are met, we will enlist our team of virtual consultants that we've enlisted to support what we're doing, and we will provide you with whatever help you need, and we'll do it free of charge. There will never be an invoice. Now, that was the theory. Wow. That was the theory, Jason. So when I launched this thing, I went out to a bunch of people I knew across LinkedIn and elsewhere and said, look, here's what we want to do. Here's why we want to do it. Will you help us? Well, as of today, we've got about, I think, 52 people that have signed up that are what we call our VIPs, virtual impact partners. And these are people like you and me that have business experience. Many of them have a good heart. They want to do what we do, but they don't have the time or the family commitments. They can't go to board meetings. They can't deliver meals. But what they're all willing to do is share expertise. So we take all the technology we have today, Zoom, text, email, and said, we're going to do this free consulting around the world. We don't have to land on the ground. We can do it like this.
Wow.
And it was an interesting theory. We launched it. We've now had over 36 engagements around the world. We can do it virtually when we travel, and it meets the test of giving back. And I have to say this, it turns out our very first engagement under GoodWorks 360 was a startup Meals on Wheels operation in Mumbai, India.
Oh my gosh.
And
goosebumpy. That's awesome.
Ultimately, we turned GoodWorks into an actual foundation. So now it's a Florida foundation, which gives us the ability, if we wanted to actually raise money to give to nonprofits. We haven't done that yet, but we started getting some people coming to us and saying, Dennis, we really like what you're doing. I'm going to be writing a book, and I'd like to donate 10% of the proceeds to what you're doing. Well, then we said, well, we really don't have a place to put it. But if we start a foundation, we can bring it into the foundation, and then we'll use the talent that we've developed on defining a good nonprofit to handed out to nonprofits that really need it, not the giants. I'm talking about the little startups. And we've done all the homework. So it all connected. And so today we have, this kind of goes into 360 Nation. I don't mean to keep droning on here, Jason, but 360 Nation today is the original website, which is called Biz Catalyst 360. And that stands alone, and it's got over 1,000 writers across the world. We won a couple of awards with that.
And how many, just a brief question, how many pieces of writing do you think you published over the years?
We're just short of 30,000 articles.
Just short. That's a lot of editing. Oh my gosh.
It is. And I mean, the good news is we've got a lot of great writers, and we published a lot, which has given us the visibility, which gave us the visibility to be handed out 2 awards over the years. The challenge of that is I've read every one of them. Now, the good news in reading every one of them, I've learned over the years, is not only does it keep my brain active because I'm reading current writing about things going on in the world, you get a real sense of where the world is, where humanity is. And I know humanity is a very important word to us. So this little idea of sitting at my wife's sister's table 12, 13 years ago has morphed into this giant website. We're going to have, in fact, we just finished out the year. Let me just look to my right here. I've got the stats. I think we ended the year with over 5 million visits to our pages. Now that's
5 million.
That's the website there. Then GoodWorks, of course, was launched, Biz Catalyst 360 is tucked under 360 Nation. GoodWorks 360 is tucked under 360 Nation. And then we have 360 Nation Studios, which we use to produce videos for good around the world. Everything is tied into the fact that nothing that I've displayed for you is done for profit. We don't collect money. We don't advertise. You will never see an advertisement or a pop-up or a sales pitch on any of our websites. We're doing it all for good. Let me also say we are very blessed to be able to say that. It's rare. And probably the number one question I get from people is, what's your business model? I said, we don't have one. What's your P&L look like? I don't have one. What's your plan? It's evolving. I mean, and people think we're crazy. They're skeptical, because I think most people are skeptical. When we get new writers, Jason, that's the questions we get. And what I've learned to say to them over the years since we've gotten bigger, I don't want to spend a lot of time defending what we do. It's like defending a positive versus defending a negative. So what I say to them now is, look, I'll be happy to talk to you about how we do what we do. But as far as the integrity of what we do, don't talk to me. Talk to anyone. Go to our website, pick out any one of our 1,000 writers, get in touch with them. You're probably connected with some of them anyhow. Ask them if we're really doing all this. Ask them if we're doing sales pitches. And I think you'll find out that we can stand by what we've told you.
What would you say about, like, so many of us have the tension between making a living and doing good in the world, and what would you say to people about navigating that tension in a healthy way?
Well, I have a couple different answers for that one. Again, I'm kind of mimicking what I've said earlier, and that is, I learned over the years, I do a fair amount of mentoring of young folks that are willing, not just because they want to be mentored, but they're willing to listen and react to that mentoring, not just checking a box. And I've had the luxury of mentoring a handful of people, and they look and they say, I want to be you when I grow up. And I think sometimes people think it's an easy road. And so what I've said to them is, look, if you have a passion, whatever it is, completely different than what you're doing, like my banking, that wasn't my passion. Start developing it as kind of a hobby. Like if you want to be a professional photographer, but today you're working in a bank, start developing it as a hobby, not as a business. Start perfecting it. Start networking with people. But do the best you can in your current job to be successful. That's what I did. I was lucky. I was successful enough. I was able to sell it. I was able to then redirect time, talent, and treasure to my passion, which happened to then be, nonprofits and everything we've talked about. Not an easy thing to say, because too many people I've mentored they want it tomorrow. I said, well, I wanted it tomorrow too, but I had to, and I didn't know until I was, effectively able to retire. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I mean, I had passions and ideas, so that's a tough one. It's just having the patience and the perseverance of knowing you're not going to have it tomorrow, but don't wait. Start developing your ideas on the side. Perfect them when you still got a full-time job, because once you jump off that cliff into the actual passion, now you're down to, are you making enough money to survive? Fortunately, we're blessed. We didn't have to worry about that, but most people aren't blessed like that.
So by keeping the regular job, you eliminate having that money stress, and then you can,
Right.
and the other hours you can nurture
Exactly.
what you really dream of.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you're probably also developing a good network of people, particularly these days when you've got the benefit of LinkedIn. You can be developing a good network of people. So when you finally segue into that business, I can come to people like Jason and other people that I've learned for advice, for guidance, for investment, for whatever. If I'm launching something new and I'm really excited about it, Jason, I'd really like to be a guest on your podcast so I can at least talk about my passion and how I got there. Next thing you know, between that network, so you're not just developing it quietly in a back room, you're thinking about the people that you're nurturing that network so you can use it. And I have to say, when we launched our website, if it weren't for LinkedIn, we probably wouldn't have been as successful, because we had already developed our network over many years in business. And so when I launched the website, guess who started coming to it? The people that knew me and said, wow, this is interesting. And it just built upon that.
Backing up a little bit, you said you met Allie, your wife, in the UK.
Yep.
Is that an exciting story of how you met?
Well, I guess it depends on whether you're asking me or her, but I'll give the answer. Yes, and here's why. It's a longer story than this, but let's just say we both discovered what we weren't looking for. I came into Allie because I was running a business over there. She was part of that business. She didn't work directly for me. I sold the business. I kind of tell the world I sold her with the business. We stayed in touch, like I stayed in touch with many people that worked for me. And I moved back to Tampa here after I sold the business. And we just stayed in touch like a lot of people. And then every once in a while, we'd go back to England, because since I sold a business and ran one, I had a lot of consulting arrangements in place. People wanted me to share the wisdom of running and selling a business. So I went back to England. Every time I went back there, Jason, I would get the virtual Rolodex out and saying, well, who do I know? Well, Allie and maybe 4 or 5 other people. And I would say, look, I'm back in England. You want to get together? And we would all get together for dinner. Long story short, I did that for a couple of years, and we were all just friends. One night I went over there, or one time in January, this goes back a ways, I went over there and all set to have this wonderful dinner with friends, and every single person had to cancel except Allie and I. And what I've said to people, it's interesting. I knew Allie for probably 4 or 5 years at that point, but I never really knew her. And what I mean by that, nobody else showed up. There's no other noise in the room. It's just the two of us having dinner. And suddenly we're eye contact. We're listening to each other. She said she discovered that I wasn't an American robot, that I did have a sense of humor. And from there, that was January. And if there's any such thing as fairy tales coming true, in September that year, she moved here. In December, we got married. And that was 16 years ago.
Wow. So you had this beautiful dream come true romance, and then you realized you were You realize you don't just want to do crosswords and bingo for the rest of your life. So
Exactly.
you decided to start taking morning walks. Can you say some more about how the quiet of the morning walks helped you both to create what you're doing now?
I mean, think about it. It's almost like when I'm sure you bumped into people these days, Jason, that say, wow, we need to disconnect for a while. And I've written articles about the notion of disconnecting because everybody talks about it, but how many people actually get off their phone for 5 minutes, let alone 5 days, 5 hours, whatever? Um, our walks were just specifically designed to get offline, to get out in the fresh air early morning. The only people we were going to meet are probably people walking their dogs, and we made an effort to meet the dogs, not the people. We wanted to
Oh,
stay.
it's fun.
So you're out in the fresh air, the sun's shining, you're in Florida, and you're clearing all the cobwebs. So we had some really deep discussions about, what's important to us. And I don't mean just me. My question to Ellie was, well, tell me what's important to you. And then I answered the question, and then we started seeing these intersections or synchronicity, between senior citizens giving back and travel. We both knew we were interested in that. The technology side, which is the website, that was my harebrained idea back then. But she's she's become part of it over the years. But it was just an kind of an accidental invention, and it served the purpose.
How long will you typically walk each morning?
Oh, about 5 miles, and that would take us. It was a slow walk. We didn't want to rush it back, so probably about an hour and a half. Could have probably done
Right.
half that time, but we wanted to just, we're both type A personalities, so we're always on a deadline. We always have a plan when we were in business, and we were still coming out of that atmosphere. It's taking me years to decompress from that, so we purposely and intentionally took slow walks so we could then, kind of come back, have a cup of coffee, talk about where we ended up. But let me also say, Jason, it took a period of months to come out with this idea of where we wanted to spend our time. It wasn't a quick thing. We were all over the place. I mean, we probably went from traveling all the time to, well, wait a minute, we don't want to do that. How do we squeeze in nonprofits? Well, that's great, but can we do that when we're traveling? Well, and what about, are we just going to do cross? I mean, we went back and forth and up and down, and that's how we got there. I would like to say that we had this master plan, but we didn't. It was an accidental discovery, and then it fell into place. It was almost magical.
Almost magical, like that, like you having this dinner party in England and suddenly all the other guests
Exactly.
having bawling out.
So yeah, it's been quite a ride. If anybody suggested this website and everything would have grown to where it is today, I'd say you're nuts. Because along the way, let me also take off some of the sugarcoating. We have made every mistake you can make in the book because we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't always ask questions. I remember waking up in England about 7 years ago, and the website was gone. And it's because of
It
something
was gone.
just gone. When you come onto a page and it says 404 error doesn't exist, that's what happened.
Oh,
It was because of something stupid I did the night before. Let me also say 7 years ago, I found Jesus in every sense of the word. I never did that again, but I learned. So we made a lot of mistakes, but each time we got a little smarter to the point now, not that we know it all, but we have the ability now. If you and I are talking, Jason, and you say something, I said, boy, that's a great idea. We should be doing that. Literally within a day, I can have a new page up, a new website up. I can design it. We can do all that in-house because we learned how to do it through some of the wisdom of mistakes and being surrounded by good people. And we have used that ability to stay fresh and current with everything we do under 360 Nation. Like Good Works, we launched that because we knew how to build a website. And it was up.
What would you say about using the wisdom of the mistakes versus using mistakes as impediments, if you will?
Oh, well, don't be afraid. As they say, don't be afraid to fail. I mean, it might have been embarrassing. We had some explaining to do when people went to the website, and I was paranoid for a couple of days because it was gone. But you can't be afraid to ask for help. And that's what we did. We did what anybody do. We reached out to people. We networked. I found just a super, super, super website guy up in Canada who I never knew. His name is Roger. Roger and I, years later, are good friends. He's kind of on the family Christmas card tree, but he saved us from disaster, and we never forgot that. I mean, the alternative would have been to say, well, that was a nice idea, but we'll just shut the website down because it's going to be too hard and too expensive to fix it. We weren't going to do that.
I love how the energy of kindness ripples out because Roger was kind to you in your time of need. It's allowed. Think of how many people have been able to create through your websites and how many people have learned from what they read, and all of that's probably because Roger was kind to you when you need it. I mean, you could have found someone else, but Roger was there.
That's the point, Jason, because with Roger, we pay him an annual fee to do what he does. But frankly, it's not about the price. It's about what he did for us and the loyalty, and that's priceless to me.
So I would be remiss. I love to write. What after reading 30,000 pieces of writing, what would you say to someone who wants to write but who gets nervous about it and thinks, well, I'll make a lot of mistakes and I don't have enough to say, blah, blah, blah.
Jason, we hear that a lot. And the one advantage we have, I'm glad you asked that question because that is so synchronistic with what we're doing here. We have the ability right now to say, Jason, when we hang up here, I'm going to send you a link, and this is going to give you everything you need to know about writing for us. And we're going to put you on our award-winning featured contributors panel. Now, I can do that because I don't have to stop and say, go to my board of directors or my marketing people or look at my bottom line and say, can we afford to take a risk with Jason? It doesn't matter to me. So we have the ability over the years to get not just seasoned writers, but brand new writers that they're just looking for a break. And frankly, they may have a confidence issue. And so we'll introduce them to other people that we know that have been kind of down that road. The same people that were reluctant years ago to write are now on the verge of putting a book out. And we were blessed with the opportunity to say, Jason, if you want that to be you, just let us know. And that's how we've gotten to over 1,000 writers. Probably a third of them had never written until they came to see us.
Probably the thought of them have never written until they came to see you. That gives me goosebumps. My gosh.
But we can also say to you, Jason, and this is not a sales pitch because we have plenty of writers. But we can say to you, Jason, yeah, maybe you've never written before, but take that leap of faith. We don't care if it's one paragraph. We don't care if it's poetry. You go to most publishing companies and they're going to say, well, Jason, yeah, well, send me 10 examples of what you've written before. And we only take these topics and they have to be minimum 1,500 words. And you have to send us something every 2 weeks. And for the luxury of doing that, you have to pay a fee. And by the way, when we publish your article, we're going to put some advertising in between each paragraph. That is the classic Forbes, Huffington Post model. And that's why we have so many writers these days, because some people have called it, not my words, they said it's a writer's nirvana, because I can write whenever I want about whatever I want, as often as I want. And guess what? We're going to publish it. And doesn't that give you, the first time you write something, we see this happen, it's kind of magical. Jason writes his first article. He's not sure if he's capable. He's not sure if he's worthy. We get it out there. We dress it up. We send it to the world. One person comes in and says, Jason, I really like what you just wrote. And they make a question. Suddenly, Jason's lit up because somebody's not only read it, but they're interested in what he's written. And if that
Mm,
doesn't set your spirit on fire as a writer, nothing
mm.
does. And because of our size and our presence, we have the ability to get those people to come to you and say, Jason, I agree with you, or I don't agree with you. Or they're going to say something, Jason, that's going to say, you're going to think, wow, I never thought of it that way, which is going to inspire you to write another article. So
Speaking of the ripple effect,
it's the ripple effect. It catches on. And then when we say to some, it's funny, this has happened over the years. We've had writers over the years that have been pretty good at business writing, human resources, sales and marketing, um, whatever, things like that. And then suddenly the pandemic came along and their businesses have been upended or they're not doing their normal job or they're remote. And so suddenly their equilibrium's off. And you know what we said to them? Something they probably didn't know or they didn't pay attention to. I'm going to pretend you're one of those people and you're an expert in human resources, Jason, and suddenly the pandemic's here and either you lost your job or you're not doing HR right now or you're doing it from home, but you still like to write. We said, Jason, forget about HR for just a minute. You know how to write about whatever inspires you.
oh my God.
I'll tell you how many writers that of that ilk have progressed to the point that they don't write about their occupation anymore. They write about childhood stories. Some of them start writing poetry because they know that they have a place for it. They know that their voice is going to be heard. They know we're going to share it with the world. And we see these, it's almost like a butterfly, coming out of the caterpillar that blooms into a butterfly. It's magical to watch. And
Wow.
it's neat.
I'm passionate about writing and have been writing since junior high. And as a writer, I just want to thank you so much for writers because it's so important that for people not only to have a place to create on their own, but have a place to share the creation with others. And you are part of your and your wife's kindness is offering this place to like a huge number. You said 1,000 writers. That's a lot of people you're offering this to. 1,000.
Yep, it sure is.
Amazing.
We've got writers on every continent except Antarctica. So if you or anybody listening today knows anybody in Antarctica, would you please tell them to call me? So I can say we got them on all 7 continents.
So, wow, so cool. So, quickly, I want to tell you about Tim. I'm glad you're tuning in, Tim. Tim a few years ago finally came out and said that he has leukemia and is going through the healing process with that. But since then, he has started a podcast showing up perspectives on cancer and done an event and now he has a book coming out with a bunch of authors talking about the cancer story and it's just so inspiring people like you pursuing what they're passionate about for good. It's just so inspiring.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, Tim, as a matter of fact, is on board with us already as a featured contributor. Based on this discussion, you better be on board next week.
Yeah. Oh, I've contributed an article. I need to contribute more.
Rumor has it, I didn't get this from Tim, that you write amazing poems.
Oh yeah, me. Yeah, I do love to write poems.
Good. Well, then that's the door that's open. Be careful what you wish for, my friend.
Oh my gosh, we'll have to
We will.
talk. But Dorothy asks, have you built in a process for continuing the website into the future?
That's a brilliant question, Dorothy. And let me say, I've never been asked that. I saw the question come up and I made a note of it. This is going to be one of our morning walk discussions. We're still doing these morning walks, by the way. They're obviously evolved, but I think it's a great question to talk about because we built a giant and we'd like to see it continue, not just continue, but continue with the same principles if it's just for good versus for profit. So we've actually been approached over the years, people that wanted to gobble us up. And we said no, because they wanted to change it into a profit model and said, we're not in it for the money. Great question, Dorothy. Thank you. And I've made a note of that.
And Mike again says, I guess he's going easy on you too, because I think this is just a compliment. He says, I can attest that 360 has given even me a platform to share my faith stories.
Mike brings up a very good point, and that is we've heard from a number of writers that couldn't find a home for their writing. Maybe it was faith-based, and we have a number of them today, and they were actually surprised that we would give them a voice. And a lot of websites have what they call editorial criteria, which is pages and pages of what they won't do and what do. Let me tell you what our criteria is. As long as what you're writing is respectful and not mean-spirited, you have a home here. Mike's point, if he wants to speak to his faith, he's got a home. But he's one of many now that are writing. We've also got a lot of people, particularly in recent years, that want to voice their opinions, but they're kind of being shut out by mainstream because they're saying words that may be not politically correct. 2 years ago, we opened up a brand new channel. It's called Viewpoints 360 because we were hearing this feedback and saying, if Jason, you have an opinion and it's not really business and it's not really poetry and it's not really storytelling, you're just upset maybe about your country or maybe about this, send it to us. You have a home with us. As long as it's respectful, as long as it's mean-spirited. I cannot tell you how many big name writers we've gotten, people that I look and say, my goodness, why did they come to us? And I speak to every new writer, and they said, because we want our voice to be heard. And we were being muffled, if you will, by mainstream.
Wow. Powerful. We're about on the hour. I ask all my guests this next question. So I talk about the power of doing our imperfect best and what that means to be me as we envision the best we want for our lives. Then when imperfections come up, we use them to move forward instead of using them as reasons to stop. You've alluded to some of this throughout the interview, but what does doing your imperfect best mean to you?
Well, I don't know if this answers your question, but I talked earlier about walking the talk, which I think Mike's question was about legacy. And we just think, and Allie and I have talked about this quite often, if we're serious about our quest to rediscover humanity at its best, then our job is to walk the talk every day. We got to, it's also our job to figure out what the world's trying to be. Where's it going? And what can we do to help it get there and be better at it and maybe do even more? It's funny, I'm just going to digress for a minute. We were going down a humanity path for years, and it never dawned on us, but people were coming to us and saying, look, we like what you're saying. We want to do more for humanity, but we don't know what to do. It's funny because I just took that for granted. So we wrote an article. I don't write very often, Jason, but I wrote an article. It was called In Search of Humanity, Time to Do More. And I just listed 15 things that you could start doing tomorrow. Like one day, every day, do this. Could be about compassion, could be about empathy, it could be about listening better, and could be kinder. Today, that same article is still out there. We're now up to 37 things you can do. Why? Because we said to the world, when you read this, tell us what else. And so now we've got a roadmap for people that can follow that path of doing more. We just think the world depends on everybody like us to show up, be present, be the best we can, and just do what we can. And that is our entire business plan quoted.
Beautiful. You have last question. You have so many websites. What's the best way for people to interact with you virtually?
I think the best place to go is to start with our primary website because everything comes from there. So that would be www.bizcatalyst360.com. And when you
Yeah.
get there, it'll talk about 360 Nation. It'll talk about Good Works. Just get yourself a large cup of coffee because we've got 60 pages on the site. So it'll take a while to find it all.
www.bizcatalyst.com.
BizCatalyst360.com.
BizCatalyst360.com. It doesn't help when the host doesn't say the name of the website. Well, this has been such a pleasure to finally get to talk with you in person. Thank you, Dennis. Thanks so much.
And I'll be in touch with you, Jason. We're going to get you on board here. We're going to see some of that poetry before the year's over.
Okay. I'm excited. Thank you.
On the hook now. Thanks so much, my friend.
There's so much magic in conversations. And so much magic in asking people questions. So much magic in telling people stories. We truly have the opportunity in this life to inspire each other to be our best, to bring out the best in each other. And it's challenging at times, sure, but it's also so wonderful. Like, wasn't learning from Dennis just so fun? And so I encourage you just to experiment more and more with having conversations that are more fulfilling. Where can you ask better questions? Where can you be more courageous in telling the stories you want to tell? Well, thanks so much for tuning in now, or if you're watching later, thanks for watching later, and have a great Thursday. And next week, speaking of stories, we'll be here back at the usual time on Wednesday with Nathan Young, who will tell us so much about the courage to share. The courage he found to share his story and how he helped so many others share that. So tune in next week. Thanks.